Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our FES webinar. And hope you're having a warm day. If you're here in Melbourne like us, you've woken up nice and chilly. But today we're coming and talking to you regarding false alarms, the effects of them, the causes, the costs, and importantly, how do we prevent them? So welcome. I'd like to start off by acknowledging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the traditional custodians of the lands upon which we're meeting today. And being remote, it may be anywhere throughout the nation, and pay our respect to their cultures and elders past and present. I'd also like to welcome everyone online today, be it First Nations or from other nations, regardless of your age, ability, relationship status, sexual orientation, gender, or faith. You're all welcome and part of today's session. So thank you for joining us. The presentations that we're about to receive will be recorded and they'll all be sent out to registered attendees after the event. And a little reminder that as we're going through and hearing from our speakers, there will be many questions, and we encourage you to please use the Q&A button, not the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And towards the end of the session today, the speakers will actually come back and answer all those questions. If we are running out of time and time doesn't permit, then we'll come back and answer those questions after the fact, but every question will be answered for you. So thank you for your understanding. And a legal disclaimer, all the material that we're presenting today is being presented from and on behalf of Fire Rescue Victoria. We're happy for you to use this information, but it is not intended to be formal advice. If you want to use it, please attribute the information to FRV or Fire Rescue Victoria. And if you've got any questions regarding it, please contact myself as General Manager for Fire Equipment Services with Fire Rescue Victoria. So, welcome. A little bit about ourselves. First and foremost, myself, I am the General Manager for Fire Equipment Services, and we are a commercial entity looking after community safety by protecting people and assets with a commercial division of FRV. We have joining us today Ian Burke, and Ian is a firefighter with Fire Rescue Victoria. He's actually been serving for more than 15 years. He's served predominantly throughout the CBD region and also the western suburbs. So he's familiar with a lot of high-rise buildings and also the suburban dwellings, and has a lot of insight into false alarms, of course. And these days is actually the senior station officer for and looking after alarm assessment. So once alarms go off and false alarms have occurred, assessing the reasons why and the patterns therein. So we'll hear from Ian shortly. We've also got Akshar Anand, who is the service manager for Fire Equipment Services. And Akshar is responsible for leading a team of service coordinators and account executives in partnering with clients to ensure that false alarms don't occur. So lots of experience in helping to prevent and to mitigate those false alarms occurring in the first place. So we've got those two speakers. So Fire Equipment Services, who are we? If you're not familiar, we were established in 1902, and FES, as we're known, is the trading name and commercial division of Fire Rescue Victoria. And Fire Rescue Victoria is a statutory authority and operates in support of the Fire Rescue Victoria Act. All the surpluses that FES generate in provision of its services directly support the operational efforts of Fire Rescue Victoria in protecting communities. So every dollar that is spent and raised by FES actually is directly supporting FRV's activities to protect and serve you and I around the community that we're in. The purpose of FES is very simple. It's to lead community safety by partnering with clients to protect people and assets. So that's the buildings and the people within them. And the vision is to be the trusted leader in both fire safety and also emergency management, and be known for the technical expertise, responsive service, and ultimately regulatory compliance. And we partner with facility managers, major corporations, small organisations, anything from large universities and hospitals down to facility managers, shopping centres, down to the corner fish and chip shop. And we provide advice to support and ensure compliance within what is a very highly complex regulatory environment. So without further ado, I might welcome Ian. As I said, Ian is our Senior Station Officer looking after alarm assessment. So welcome, Ian.
Thank you, Stuart. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I am the Acting Senior Station Officer in Alarm Assessment at the moment. I've been there for 12 months. So hopefully the information that I can provide for everybody that's tuning in will assist you in your submissions when they come through to us. And hopefully at the end of the day, our core business is to try and remove false alarms or reduce the number of false alarms that we've got fire trucks going to. So we are under the Directorate of Community Safety. And part of that community safety is that there's a risk involved every time that we've got trucks flying down the street. They are legally allowed to go 20 kilometres over the speed limit when they're on the way to a call, and that presents a risk to the wider community. So at the end of the day, our job is to try and reduce those false alarms. And obviously the key way that we can do that, if we can go to the next slide, is to charge for it. I understand that the charges are high, but if we look at the figures here in 1989, 1990, when the old MFB or Metropolitan Fire Brigade began charging for false alarms, we can see there 68% of our calls were false alarms when there were no charges in place. If we now look forward to 2021, the latest data that we've got, false alarms, we're looking at just over a quarter of the number of total calls that we go to. So we can see that the charging does have a positive effect on the number of false alarms that we do attend. And although it may seem unfair at the time, obviously no one likes to get a charge given against them, we can see that there's a positive effect from our point of view in not having those appliances attend calls. The other risk that goes with that is that if we've got appliances that are attending false alarms, they're obviously not available for other calls. So given the fact that we attend road accidents, industrial accidents, hazmat incidents, and we're also first responders for medical response, if you then put our hat on it and you think about the fact if you had somebody close to you that had a heart attack that a fire truck would normally respond to, you would like them there in the shortest amount of time, I'm sure, rather than responding to a false alarm. One other thing with this is that we've noticed from the data that we track, if we have periods of industrial action, I think the last one was about 5 years ago, and charges don't occur at that time, the number of false alarms that we attend spikes at that particular time. So again, it's just further proof to us that the charging, although it may seem unfair at the time, it does have the effect that we want it to do, and that is in reducing the number of unwanted false alarms that we have to attend to each year. If we can go, we have got some polls so that'll be running. So if the poll comes up on the screen, people would like to take a second just to read through this. So if you'd just like to take a guess, at least how many individual staff do you think Fire Rescue Victoria have involved in assessing a false alarm to arrive at a decision? So your options there are 1 person, 2 persons, or 3. Okay, if you can see the results there, so 61% of people that have answered have correctly said it's 3, and it's actually 3+, so it's at least 3, and I'll go through that process in a second. Just with the poll that's on your screen, if you click on the close button at the top right-hand side, that'll take it off your screen. Otherwise, you can leave it on there. So as I said, we do have 3 sets of eyes. We don't sit there as a department and come in at the start of the day and go, is today going to be a good day or a bad day? Are we going to just charge people or not? All of our decisions are made under the Fire Rescue Victoria Act of 1958. And also there's a large amount of internal doctrine under Fire Rescue Victoria as well, in terms of our regulations for what we can charge for and what we cannot charge for. So it's not quite as simple as somebody making a phone call and saying, oh, can you make this charge go away? There is legislation, there are internal guidelines that we have to follow. And that's why sometimes it can be quite difficult when we speak to people and they would like us to make the charge go away, and it's just impossible to do so. So once you've had the fire trucks attend your scene, the officer on scene will fill out what's called an entry advice, which is a little bit of paperwork. They'll go and investigate. They'll make sure there's no sign of fire. Once they're satisfied that it is a false alarm, they will reset your system and they will fill in the paperwork and leave the paperwork with you on scene. Once they get back to station, they then have to complete a fire report. And once that fire report has been completed, that generates a report in my system or our system, and we will start commencing the initial assessment. Now, the first part of the legislation here, which sometimes goes in the favour of the stakeholders, and I will get to these calls in a second, what's a fault and what's a non-fault. Generally, a fault call is anything to do with the system itself. So whether it's wiring or a faulty detector, if a detector is activated and we can't find a reason for that, we would consider it a fault call. Now, if the initial assessment for that fault call doesn't take place within 90 days by Fire Rescue Victoria, under legislation, we have to wipe that call, and we have done so. If it's a non-fault call, so the non-fault calls are generally human activated. So the system is activated because it thinks there's a fire, it's doing the right thing. Somebody has done something to cause that to happen. For those calls, that's a 30-day window. So if we don't initially assess those within 30 days and begin processing it, they have to get wiped off as well. At that point, there will be a letter go to the customer and it will inform you that there's been a false alarm. There are potential charges involved. And if you would like to provide a submission to Fire Rescue Victoria that we can consider, then we will do so. You're given 21 days to submit that. Under legislation, it only needs to be 14. So we're already going an extra 7 days. And in some instances, if there is a site that has very low call numbers, we may on occasion offer an extra 7 days. So in effect, you get a month. We stick to that, and that's quite strict. The admin staff that are in our department have an out-of-date letter that they will send. So if those documents aren't received by us and we have full staff on board, our calls will process very, very quickly. So the first point to take away for anyone listening is to get that submission done as quickly as you can, so that if there are any issues, we can talk about it, we can try and discuss it rather than wait until it's out of date, because the chances are you may not get the answer that you're looking for. Once that's done, there is then a recommendation that's made by operational staff. So at the moment, we've got leading firefighters or a station officer will look at the recommendations, and we're also training some of our admin staff to be able to do this as well. When they look at the recommendation, or when they make the recommendation, they will be looking at all the evidence that they've got in front of them. So they'll look at the fire report, which is provided by the officer on scene, and that should have a description of the scene as they found it. Any submission that you as the customer have made, we will take into account. We will look at the history of the site, and we will also look at any additional relevant information. From there, it goes to the third step. So once the recommendation is made, then under the delegation of the commissioner, it's either a station officer, it's myself as the senior station officer, or a commander. We will then accept that recommendation. We can overrule that recommendation, or we can discuss that recommendation with operational staff if we think there's learnings for the broader department. And at that time, or under all of these three stages, we're looking at what is a reasonable excuse. Now, what you consider to be a reasonable excuse and what we consider to be a reasonable excuse may be somewhat different. But from our point of view, we're looking at the fact that has everything possible been done to prevent this false alarm happening? In the majority of cases where we decide to charge, I would suggest the answer is definitely no. And that's backed up by the fact that all of our decisions are open to go to VCAT if somebody's not happy. We're yet to go to VCAT and not be able to charge when we think we should be able to charge. So for me, that backs up that our decision making is as close to 100% as possible. Obviously, we will make mistakes. We're open to accept the fact that we make mistakes, and I have overruled decisions, even my own decisions, when further evidence has been provided on occasion. Can we have the... Yep, thank you. So if we go back to see how much people are listening. So next poll is up there. What information can support your submission for a false alarm to Fire Rescue Victoria? Is it A, the maintenance documents, B, the evidence of preventative measures, C, a request to waive the fee, or D, both A and B? Okay, so we can see the results there. It is correct, D. So 98% of people got that correct. So we're looking for maintenance documents to show that you are strictly compliant to AS 1851. And we're also looking for evidence of any preventative measures that have occurred prior to this activation. So the key term there is prior to the activation. A lot of the time we get submissions and the evidence will come in for things that the stakeholder has done post the activation. Given that the majority of calls when it's a first activation of type don't get charged, we're looking for you as a stakeholder to then go away and go, okay, this is now the point where we start looking at what can we do to prevent the next one from occurring. So I briefly explained this before. If we look at fault calls, so those involving the system themselves, so we're looking at possibly the fire indicator panel, sprinklers, the alarm signaling equipment, any wiring faults, any faulty detectors. And we also include under fault here, any detectors that may have been affected by, I'll call it regular dust. So if we have a report from our officer on scene who explains to us that the area in which the detector activated appeared dirty or dusty, then that may be considered a fault call. That's different to a non-fault call if we're looking specifically at dust, where we would look at things like if concrete is being cut and there's concrete dust. So the non-fault calls are those calls where the system is not to blame. So there's a human element involved. The system itself has done exactly what it's supposed to do. It's alerted the fire brigade that there may be a fire. So for example, here we have code 756 calls, which are very, very regular. They involve cooking or burnt foodstuffs. Manual call points or break glass alarms. We find a lot of those are located near doorways, and so they are mistaken for exit buttons. And we've got or damage to sprinkler heads. So they're just examples of those. Another one that I just mentioned before is when contractors fail to isolate, they then commence their works, and their works as a result cause the system to go into activation. At the moment, the cost has just gone up again. It's $597 per appliance per 15 minutes. Now, given that the majority of calls have at least 2 appliances and some have more, you can see that we're looking at nearly $1,200 per 15 minutes straight away. And the average charge is $2,500 to $3,000. That charging is not set by Fire Rescue Victoria. It's set by a government index. So we have a certain number of penalty units that we charge, and that gets indexed to the CPI each year by the government. And so give or take around the 1st of July each year, that will go up. Can we go to the next screen, please? Okay, so when providing a submission, so if it's a fault call, and if you need clarification on this, if it's not apparent from the officer's description on your entry advice, you can email us and we're happy to discuss this. But for a fault call, we would like to see the maintenance documents. Now, I cannot stress enough, this is not a letter from your maintenance company with 3 dates saying that they've attended. The maintenance documents are exact copies of the maintenance book, which is kept on scene or should be kept on scene legally as a hard copy at your FIP. One thing we're finding at the moment is some maintenance companies are providing QR codes on the door of the fire indicator panel. We can't access the records from a QR code. because under our internal regulations, we're not supposed to take a mobile phone, which, as it's not considered intrinsically safe, onto the site until the appropriate checks have been done on that site. So when we go to a fire call, assuming that every call is an emergency, we are not supposed to take the mobile phones on there. So even though you may have QR codes, you do need to keep the hard copy on scene at the FIP. Those maintenance documents can be very simply 3 photographs taken, sent in to us, copies of the last 3 months of the documents. That will be sufficient. We're specifically looking at those maintenance documents to make sure that any ongoing issues or faults are being rectified. So if we see the same defects coming up 3 months in a row, we may consider that you're not strictly compliant to AS 1851. And as a result, that's likely to have a negative effect on the assessment that we make on this call. Your documents need to be specific to the fault or the call that we've gone to. So if we've turned out for a fire indicator panel, the documents need to be for the fire indicator panel. If we've turned out for a sprinkler call or a valve monitor, then we need the sprinkler documents. We don't need both sets, but if you send both sets, that's not an issue. We're looking at the 3 months, as I said, so that we can see strict compliance. And we're also looking at any proof of works that have been completed. Now, if those proof of works are completed post the activation, we will attach that to your site history for any future calls. Ideally, what we would like to see is proof of works prior to this activation if you've had previous ones in the past. For a non-fault call, we're looking at preventative measures put in place prior to this activation. So a letter that says we are going to do this and this and this to avoid the next one doesn't show me any preventative measures, and it's not prior to the activation, and it is unlikely to be considered. We're looking for proof and evidence of the work that's been done. So I take for granted the submissions that I get where people tell me they're going to do a lot of things. The actual proof or the evidence where your fire maintenance company has been on scene, or the work has been completed, or the measures have been put in place, photos, for example, we will put that again on your site history, and we will refer to it for future calls, and hopefully it may assist you for this present call. Ideally, with non-fault calls, we will take into account such things like resident education. However, the effectiveness of those measures is very, very limited. So please be aware that just because you've put signage up asking your residents not to cook, for example, or make sure they've got the extraction fan on, may not be sufficient, because in a large number of the non-fault calls, it's actually the system that needs updating or the system that needs being made fit for purpose, as opposed to explaining to your tenants or your residents or your contractors what needs to happen. So we need to actually see that something has been done to the system. It can be attached to the site history for future reference, as I've said. And as I just explained there, we're looking to improvements to the systems over education. However, we will still take education in the early stages. So if you've got low call numbers, the education will be taken as a first step. Next slide, please. So here's an example. These are just FES examples. Any of your fire maintenance companies will have their own with their own logo and letterhead on the top. But these are examples of the preventative maintenance records that we're looking for. So on the left-hand side, as you look at it, you can see there the fire indicator panel. There's lots of little tick boxes. That's what my staff are looking for, to see that those boxes are ticked in the appropriate areas. And there's a section down the bottom where the maintenance technician, before they sign, can make a list of any defects. We're looking to see if those defects reoccur over the consecutive months, to see whether that gives us an indication of how strict your compliance is to AS 1851. On the opposite side, you can see there's a sprinkler system test sheet, similar but different. Again, down the bottom is where the key part that we'll be looking for, where they can list any defects with your system. The next one. If you've got any other further questions, or you would like more information, you can go to the FRB website, type in alarm systems, and you will be able to find that. There's also legislation under the Victorian government. You can go and check that everything that I've said is correct. And we also have an alarm inquiries mailbox, which gets looked at each day and sent to the appropriate people within our department. Just one thing I didn't mention though, please bear in mind when you send in an email to us, we're looking at 15 to 20,000 calls a year. There's only 4 operational staff in there, so that's a large number of work. So if we don't get back to you that day, there's probably a reason for it. Thanks everybody for listening. More than happy to answer your questions, whether it's today or in the future, and keep up the good work, all those people who are trying to reduce false alarms. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. I appreciate that. And I certainly took a number of learnings from that myself. So thank you for your good work on that one. Just a reminder, the questions, I can see there's already some questions coming through the Q&A. We will address those at the end of the presentation. So please keep them coming through the Q&A. So now we're going to move over to Akshar Anand. And as I mentioned, Akshar is the service manager within Fire Equipment Services, or FES, and works hand in hand with clients and partners to try and eliminate these false alarms. So Akshar, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you all for joining in. Sorry, we just had a bit of feedback there. So look, thank you all for joining in and tuning in this morning. Again, happy to be here to help assist people in our knowledge regarding false alarms as a maintenance provider. So the topics for discussions are there up on your screen. Without further much ado, I'll go into the first slide. So basically a bit of information regarding how Fire Equipment Services, or FES, fits into the picture. So FES is a department of the brigade, and we support the brigade in all their goals, which includes the reduction of false alarms. As you heard from Ian before, the false alarms not only add costs to the customers, but at the end of the day, the emergency services are there for emergency purposes. And the more we can get the emergency side of things looked at, the better for the community, the better for the brigade, and so on. So FES is the preventative maintenance arm of the brigade. We approximately maintain around 1,500 detection sprinkler systems throughout Victoria. One thing I would also like to clarify, that there is complete operational separation between FES as a service provider to other FRV departments, such as alarms assessment. So if there is an alarm at a site where FES services for a customer, we are treated exactly the same way as another maintenance provider would be, at complete arm's length. As a maintenance provider, FES comes across a range of issues throughout our maintenance to AS 1851, and we assist our customers and the community in reducing false alarms to the best of our ability. I believe there's a poll question that will be coming up on your screens quickly. So if you just want to take a few seconds to see if you can answer that. So the question is, which of the following may possibly set off a smoke detector? Smoke, dust, hairspray, or all of the above? So just going to give you a few seconds to see if some people can answer that, and then we can have a discussion about it. All right, so the results are there. So yeah, look, it looks like the vast majority of people, 91%, have selected the correct option, which is all of the above. So you can remove the results from your screen by closing it. But look, the main question there is, that means that 10% of people who are not aware that aerosols can also, be a reason for false alarms. So false alarms, as Ian explained before, they can be fault and non-fault. The easiest ones to try and eliminate are to reduce activities, false alarms due to activities such as cooking. Burnt toast is a major one. couldn't tell you how many times we've seen that in entry advices and our customers calling in. So we had a new staff member who was working and they burned some toast, and that set off the false alarm. Use of aerosols happens from time to time, where people have used aerosols in the vicinity of a smoke detector, and that's caused an alarm as well. Smoking and cleaning are some of the other reasons. So for example, cleaners come in, sometimes they'll use a different type of product which can produce fumes. Smoking near owners' corporations and in common areas, that can also be a major cause. So these are all easily eliminated. I know it's easier said than done. In some cases, you cannot control everyone, but these are the ones that you want to try and reduce to almost a zero if possible. Malicious activity is also one that's continuously popping up. So again, your safety security procedures for your sites, especially around, say, owners corporations where there's lots of common areas. We've seen recent examples where people have gone and tried to damage, say, manual call points, your hydrant valves and so on, which can again cause false alarms. One of the other ones that you can try and reduce is to have proper procedures for your contractors. So a lot of the time we will see contractors have come in because they're not aware on what the systems are on site, and they've started doing work, and that has caused a false alarm. Non-maintenance of system, as Ian said, that's one of the things that the brigade looks at when assessing your submission. So this is one that is again avoidable. So if you maintain your system to AS 1851, and that includes any high-level servicing or any defects that your maintenance contractor reports, then you can reduce the chances of having a false alarm. An example, for example, could be in terms of your sprinkler system. So you may be doing your monthlies, your 6 monthlies and annual checks as per AS 1851 2012, but then there's higher level checks required as well. So for example, the sprinkler system needs to be overhauled once every 5 years. That's called the 5-yearly check. If that's not done, then that may be impacting the control valve. So it may not be immediately evident, but say after a few months, it may cause a false alarm because there's internally an issue with the control valve, and a 5-yearly check which was supposed to be done hasn't been done. So things like that, what are reasons for false alarms and what you can do. Some of the consequences of this, as you all might be aware, this can obviously disrupt your business activities for your workers and occupants, causes downtime, loss of productivity. I'm sure nobody wants that. Responding to this can lead to unnecessary strain on the resources and community. So again, we want to keep the brigade in there for the event of an emergency and try not to get them to go to false alarms if possible. Another one consequence of this could be that the building occupants get complacent. So a lot of the time, if there's a regular false alarm, staff might start thinking, oh, look, it's another one, so not to worry about it, and so on. And this could lead to disaster in an emergency. So this is another one to bear in mind, that false alarms is not just dollars, but there can be other consequences for them as well. We'll move on to the next slide. So basically, what can be done to minimize false alarms? Now, firstly, before I go into that, I'll go into what not to do. So this is a really important one. You must not, under any circumstances, tamper with the system or the ASA. This is an offense under the FRV Act 1958. Penalties apply, and this could also have potential serious negative consequences. So it could impact your safety of your staff, your assets, your insurance, and so on. We can understand why that would happen, is because people might go, all right, I'm having too many false alarms, I just need to have it stopped. Regardless of the motivation there, you cannot do that. It'll be more painful in the long run, so it should not be done under any circumstances. What you could do to minimize them, firstly, I would say you can ensure a contractor is in place and your systems are being maintained to AS 1851 2012. Not only will it prevent false alarms in the first place, but it will also assist in if you do have an alarm, that you have proper records that you can then provide to the submission team, and they can assess it properly. You need to be aware of your systems and consider prior to making any changes to the current environment. So a lot of times we see that people have made changes to the environment. So for example, say a premises is being used as a warehouse, and then suddenly things have changed and they've started doing additional activities there. Now, if you have a detection system which is fit for purpose as a warehouse, if you go and make some changes, you need to be understanding that if you're changing the environment, how does it impact your system itself? So please do make note of what your systems can and can do, and if you're not sure, ask your maintenance contractor again. Educate all staff, cleaners, visitors, so preventable false alarms, such as burnt toast incidents can be reduced. This is an important one, and it gets overlooked all the time. Most of us have site induction documents at the moment, so you have a contractor coming in, you have visitors coming in, you have new staff coming in, you let them through the induction, but we see time and time again that the fire system isn't included in the induction documents. That could be one easy, simple process to add it in. So when you have new people coming in, they already are aware what the do's and don'ts for your site is. That should help again in trying to reduce any false alarms that are preventable. On the slide, you can see there's an example there of an onboarding guiding checklist that's from one of our sites. But yeah, you can add it to your induction requirements, and hopefully that assists further as well. I think we'll move on to the next slide. Continuing on, how to minimize or what can be done is to have up-to-date procedures. So regardless of an induction, sites sometimes will have contractors coming in. Some sites will have a lot of ongoing maintenance requirements. So, your lift contractors, your carpet cleaner, and so on and so on. There can be n number of contractors that come in. So having this isolation process set is one of the things that can minimize false alarms. So that can be that a contractor comes in, they fill in a book that you have separately for isolations on who's doing the isolation, what is being done for, and somebody signing off at the end as well that it has been de-isolated properly. Now, you want to keep your system offline for as small a time as possible. So it assists not only in minimizing false alarm, but also then keeping your site compliant in that period of time. Now, Ian touched on this before, that education may not just be enough, but again, doing that will not hurt. So having signage such as no smoking, also considering different languages if possible or appropriate. So we've seen in the recent past that especially for apartment buildings, there's been a lot of diverse backgrounds there, and sometimes people just don't understand what's going on. So more education that we can do. Yes, it may not be your get out of jail card for a submission, or it may be, as Ian said, but it will at least help in preventing some of your basic false alarms. If there are continuous issues in some cases, then you must consult the maintenance provider or fire engineer, as Ian was alluding to before, that the system might need updating. For example, like it may not be appropriate for the area environment, but those are discussions that can be had with your maintenance provider, and they might engage a fire engineer or provide you with those services where they will assess the environment and say, all right, something has changed, and there will be a process to go through to try and change your system there. Now, sometimes things will go wrong. As we know that some of these systems are old, some of the systems can be new, some of them can be easily identifiable. Sometimes there might be site conditions that have changed, and they can be very difficult to get to, especially in terms of detection systems. They can be scenarios where it's process of elimination. So, all right, a false alarm has happened, and we don't know why it's happened. So initially we'll go and replace the detector itself. And then if it continues to happen, then that will be a sign that there's something inherently going wrong with the system, such as cabling going wrong, interference on the loop from other systems, such as your mechanical ventilation or something else. So work with your maintenance provider. So most maintenance providers would try and work with the customer, because at the end of the day, if they don't do the right thing by yourself, they will no longer be on your site. So most of the maintenance providers would tell you things to try and reduce your risk and go through the process of elimination. So sometimes customers will be like, we just want it done. And in most cases, that is an appropriate response, but sometimes it will be a process of elimination. So all I can say is just work with your maintenance provider, and hopefully they can provide you with good service. What happens after a false alarm? So if you've gone through all of this above and again, as I said, this still can be a chance that you have a false alarm, and as we do. So you should contact your maintenance provider as appropriate and as soon as you can after the false alarm. Now, sometimes people will not contact the maintenance provider for a week, 10 days. Now, with a false alarm, the sooner that we can get out on site, the sooner we can see what the current site conditions were at the point of false alarm. Now, sometimes if you know why it's happened, again, going back to the burnt toast example, but that's a different story. But if you don't know, then the sooner the maintenance provider can attend, the better to try and resolve the situation. Please provide the FRV entry advice if possible to your maintenance provider. We see it all the time that we get some information, but not the entry advice. The entry advice is a good document to start off, because that tells the technician who attends on what the FRV has already investigated from their end. And so he can take it on from that point in time. To get to the point, say you've had a false alarm and you've contacted your maintenance provider, and now you're ready to provide a submission to FRV, as Ian said, within the 21 days limit. So the maintenance provider should be able to provide you with all the information that you need to make your submission to the alarms assessment team. So either they will already have, you'll have the logbook on site. If you're not based on site, you can contact them and say, all right, I've engaged you to provide services to AS1851. Please provide me the last 3 test sheets. And if you had any work done previously as a preventative measure, please provide me details on what work was done or an invoice and things like that. And that information can be then shared with the alarms assessment team to make your submission as strong as possible. Now, please note that the submissions are only accepted by the alarm submission team from the entity that the alarm signal equipment, or ASC, is assigned to. So maintenance provider cannot provide the submission on your behalf. They can provide you with all the information, which you can then collect and then make the submission to the alarms assessment team. Now, FES, as you said, we maintain around 1,500 of such systems. We provide assistance with the submission at no additional cost to all our customers where we maintain the systems. We'll generally provide, all supporting documentation, such as test reports, regular maintenance carried out, fault finding reports, any proof of evidence of any repairs carried out to assist with the submission. I'm sure other providers do that as well. But yeah, if there's any FES customers listening to this, and if you need assistance with the false alarm, please feel free to contact us. A lot of you already do, and we will help you in collecting those documentation to provide that submission. I think that's the end of our slides, but here's a copy of the entry advice. This is a blank one. So this is what the brigade will leave on site. As you can see, there's a lot of information there. So this provides detailed information that can then be passed on to the maintenance contractor. So then they can understand what the brigade found exactly when they were on site. And it can sometimes be really helpful to the maintenance contractor for the next steps. I think that's the end. So I think we'll go to questions next, but I'll hand over to Stuart now.
Thank you very much, Akshar. Appreciate that. And again, picked up a few little gems again for myself. So even working in the industry, I'm still learning things, which is challenging, but also good to see. I've got to say, we're now going to be moving over to questions. And so I'm happy to say we've got a number of questions that have been coming through the Q&A. And so we'll throw over to both Ian and Akshar to answer them. We've also got a couple of others in the background here. Rob Lind, who is the Safety and Quality Manager at FES. And we've also got Tara Papapetru, who is an account executive with FES also. So we've got a panel here who can jump in and answer. If you've got any more questions, please just type them in the Q&A and we can type them even if we're not speaking to them. But for what it's worth, I think we'll get a lot of valuable information from these. So I'm just going to start off. Ian, I think I'll direct the first one to yourself. Can you please explain the guidelines around determining whether or not to charge, and also can decisions be provided with the reasoning?
Yeah, sure. So I think I did explain this. The question may have come through just prior. We look at things like the history, the maintenance documents, the submission, any preventative works, and they will all go in, hopefully, the stakeholders' favour. In terms of actually providing reasons for those calls, when there's 15 to 20,000 calls per year and only four of us to do them, it's near impossible to provide individual decisions. However, there's myself and the station officer. We probably, at a guess, we would answer anywhere between 30 and 50 individual emails per week where stakeholders have requested reasons for the charge. And once it's explained, usually they're accommodating of the answer. And if they're not at that stage, that's when they would then go to VCAT and put an application into VCAT to question the decision.
Okay, thank you, Ian. I hope that answers the question there that came through from Emmy. Another one, probably following on, Ian, I know it was during your presentation. Are you able to explain what intrinsically safe means in a bit more detail?
Yeah, so that was just more in relation to any of the equipment that we carry on the appliances or that we take into any site that's deemed an emergency site has to be ticked off by quite a few committees within Fire Rescue Victoria and also the union to make sure that it has been tested to be intrinsically safe. And that means that it's not going to have some sort of activation of itself, the device that it is, that may be detrimental or may provide a health and safety risk to the firefighters.
Okay, thank you. And there was one question that I know that has been answered or typed answer by Tara, but it's a question we get a lot. So I might actually ask this live of Akshar, and that is, must smoke and heat detectors be replaced after 10 years? Is this actually legislated? And where do I find information about this?
Thanks, Stuart. Yes. Sorry. All right. Sorry, I think we've got the feedback issue sorted there. So, yep, look, good question. Absolutely. The short answer is, look, it depends on the manufacturer. So there's manufacturer's recommendations regarding, when a detector needs to be replaced and when the end of service life happens. Under 1851/2012, though, there is a service life period where detectors can be defected if it exceeds the service life, but the service life itself depends on the manufacturer's recommendations. So it depends from detector to detector. The smoke alarms have 10 years. So this is your residential type smoke alarms, but smoke detectors don't have that 10-year across the board. Okay, hopefully that answers that.
Thank you, Akshar. Appreciate that one. Another question here, again, it's probably best for yourself, Ian. Can you request an extension of time if the situation is complex and investigation and preventative works needs extra time to prepare our submission?
You can always request. You can request an extension of time. If there are exceptional circumstances, we will take that into account. But it would be remiss of me to say to everybody, yep, just provide a reason why, because we as FRV will be the, I guess, the governing body, for want of a better term, to decide whether or not we consider it exceptional and whether or not there's a reason that we think is reasonable for it to be outside that time frame. Because as I said, we already go beyond the 14 days under the FRV guidelines that we have to. So it would need to be very exceptional, I think, for us to go outside that. So my advice to any stakeholders would be contact us early within the time frame if you think there's going to be an issue that may go beyond that, rather than wait until after the time frame and you're out of date, and then it looks like you're sort of clutching at straws a little bit to try and avoid a charge.
Yeah, good advice. Ask often and ask early.
Yeah.
Okay. Question here, and actually this might be one for yourself. What is the actual time frame for when reported defects associated with a fire indicator panel or a sprinkler testing must then be rectified?
Thanks, Ian. And good question again. So look, it depends on the criticality of the defect rather than a generalized scenario there. So with critical defects, your maintenance provider should be reporting that to you within 24 hours. That's what we strive to do. Obviously, there can be situations where these things are out of hand, but that is what the standard requires, and that's what we try and strive to, and that's what you should be holding any maintenance provider to account to. So it depends whether it's critical or non-critical, and it'll also depend then on whether how likely you think it's going to cause a false alarm. So, for example, if the technician goes out and does a report today, and a detector is excessively dirty, and say it's going into maintenance fault or a pre-alarm already, then you should take immediate action on that and try and fix it then and there, if possible, so that it doesn't go into alarm and then causes this whole chain reaction. So yeah, the answer to that is the time frame will depend on the criticality of the defect, and that's what we should be looking at.
Thank you, Akshay. And moving on, like I said, as we're answering these questions, we're getting more and more coming through. So we'll just keep powering on.
Sorry, Stuart, can I just intervene there just on that last one as well?
Please.
There's actually a fire safety aspect to that as well too. So if the defects aren't being rectified as soon as possible, stakeholders are opening themselves up to possible litigation should there be some sort of a tragedy within that building and defects have been listed and not been rectified. Hence why alarm assessment will deal with those very strictly, because we can see the bigger picture of what could go wrong, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's an important call out, Ian. There's litigation, there's also insurance complications also. Here's a question which I think is probably going to grow in popularity over the coming years, but it's certainly raised its head over the last few, and that is, will vapor from vaping, as in the e-cigarettes, set off and activate a smoke alarm? Ian, do you know the answer to that one?
Simple answer is yes.
Okay. Another good reason not to take up smoking or vaping. But I did say this is not formal advice, but yeah, personally, yeah, there you go. Another one here, it was an anonymous attendee, but Ian, I think good one for you. Are we actually allowed to isolate and de-isolate the fire panel?
So under section 75B of the Fire Rescue Victoria Act, any interference with a fire panel, unless under exceptional circumstances, can again cause legal issues if there was to be a tragedy, and also there is a much larger fine in place that's currently going through the appropriate channels. It hasn't been ticked off yet, but it'll be in excess of $10,000. So for anybody that interferes with their fire panel. So you should be going back to your fire service provider, whether it's FES or whoever it may be, and asking them to do any of the isolations, because they're the ones that are trained in that area.
Yep, great advice. And following on from that, actually, you might want to actually answer this. So what are the requirements around isolating the smoke detectors? What do you actually need to do?
Thanks, Stuart. So yes, just following up from Ian, it's basically the same sort of scenario. So you should try and keep them at a minimum if possible. You should try and contact your service provider. So then if works are being done, for example, in a very specified area, then the isolation can be limited to that area and not the whole system. The de-isolation also then occurs as quickly as possible after the works are done. So it's not that somebody else who's not trained has accidentally isolated something and then left it isolated for a period of time. And then unfortunately there's a fire occurs, and then there's legal implications from that. So that's in a nutshell. This is a bit of a complicated one, but yeah, generally you should try and keep isolations to a minimum where possible.
Thank you, Akshay, for that further explanation. Staying with you, Akshay, there's a question here from Karen asking, so immediately following a false alarm, the maintenance contractor should be asked to attend, but what exactly are they doing? Are they investigating or fixing, or just providing a report to go along with the submission to alarm assessment?
Thanks for that question, Karen. It's a good one. So look, what the maintenance provider is doing is basically what you want them to do. So if you know that it is already a false alarm due to burnt toast, the system has been reset, and nothing to do there anymore, you may not call the maintenance contractor in that instance. But if you have an alarm going off and you don't know why it has gone off, you don't know when it will go off again, that's when you need to contact the maintenance provider as quickly as possible. So what they will do at that point in time is they will try and, again, depending on how soon they can get on site, hopefully they can investigate and see if there's still those conditions on site which cause the false alarms. Now, sometimes these systems are not smart, so they may start with, all right, this detector went into it, I can't find any reason for it. At a minimum, we should replace it as a precaution, so that if there is a defect in the detector, although it may not be visible, then at least replacing a detector is much more cost effective than having the brigade attend again for the same false alarm. So that's what they would do. So they will investigate if possible, or they will try and fix to the best of their ability, and depending on the situation there, and then they will provide a report, which may again assist with the submission as well. So that's the answer in a nutshell.
Thank you, Akshay. And this is an interesting question that's come in from Casey, but Ian, it reflects back to yourself. Curiously, of the 15 to 20,000 calls that are coming through to the alarm assessment team, how many of those are emergencies versus false alarms?
So 99.9% of those would be false alarms. Yeah, so those 15 to 20,000 calls that I'm talking about are just the false alarms for the financial year. Fibre FRV in general, now that we've gone statewide, we're looking at 20,000 plus calls total per month. So nearly 250,000 calls a year. Yeah,
so I think that answers or provides some scale of how significant an issue false alarms is. If you've got 20,000 false alarms a month coming through. So, yeah.
No, sorry, the 20,000 false alarms, that's per year.
Per year, sorry,
yep.
Per year, yes. 20,000 per year, false alarms. Actually, here's another question that's come through. Ian, this is probably one for yourself that you can provide some insight, but it's come from an anonymous attendee. But what happens in obviously an apartment building here, once an owner's corporation conveys to a tenant or lot owner that there was an unsuccessful submission, but the lot owner is refusing to pay the cost?
So this would probably be a controversial answer. So first of all, Fire Rescue Victoria doesn't abrogate the passing on of costs to individual tenants or residencies under any circumstances. We have on occasion attended VCAT as an interested party, which is similar to a witness on behalf of a third party, where the owner's corporation has tried to on-charge that. Now, the reason for that is because the alarm signalling equipment belongs to the responsible entity for that building. And if the owner's corporation takes responsibility for that, then it's their responsibility. Because of the fact that we don't generally charge for a first call, so generally we don't charge for a first call, there must be a history or a historical element in the previous 12 months or 24 months to explain why this may have happened previously, and hopefully that would alert the owner's corporation to do something about it. What we are generally finding, and again, this is generalization, what we are generally finding is because of the cost and because of the process involved with actually changing the fire protection systems, owners corporations see the easier option to on-charge it rather than pay the bill or fix the system. As I said right back in the mid part of my presentation, fixing the system is what we're after so that we can reduce false alarms in total. And in order to do that, we do need to take on some of that cost and go through a lengthy process to get that done, consulting fire service engineers and also building surveyors. So again, we don't accept that the passing on of costs is reasonable to the individual owners under the majority of circumstances.
Thank you, Ian. It is a contentious issue, but one that's really out of our hands. So due to time, we're going to have to wrap it up at this point. So apologies, we haven't gotten to all of the questions, but as I said, we will actually respond to them all. And so those that have been unanswered, we will come back to you, and we will be sharing these slides and the presentation to all registered attendees. So if you do want some more information, Fire Rescue Victoria, specifically the alarm assessment team, which Ian is part of, you can see their email address. You can add to all of his emails coming through. You can see the website, but also social media. And social media is a great way to keep abreast of information and trends that are occurring. So I encourage you to follow Fire Rescue Victoria, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Additionally, if you want information from Fire Equipment Services, being the trading name and commercial arm of Fire Rescue Victoria, please reach out via email, again, our website, phone, and also our social media channels, where you'll receive a lot more information on fire safety and also emergency management. So with that, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you to Ian, thank you to Akshar, our presenters, thank you to those members behind the scenes, Tara, Rob, Leonie, Colleen, and others that have helped make this webinar come to life. And maybe just in summary, I'd just like to say we want our fire systems to work properly. We want false alarms to be minimised as much as possible. 20,000 calls a year. As Ian said, 68% of respondents back in 89, 90 were false alarms. That's been reduced down to less than or around a quarter of all responses. We want to see that number reduced as much as possible so that our fire services and emergency services can actually respond to real incidents. So if an incident does occur, lesson there, submit and submit quickly, ask questions, and being engaged in that process. From a maintenance perspective, if you're a property owner or manager, then please become educated, know the risks, become knowledgeable about the requirements, and most importantly, partner with your maintenance provider of choice, be it FES or be it someone else. I'm being agnostic here. Find a partner that you can, a maintenance provider that you can trust and work with closely, and then act on the advice. And ultimately, we want to reduce false alarms. We want to reduce the costs to yourselves, and we also want to improve the community safety so that our Fire Rescue Victoria respondents can actually go to the real incidents rather than being called out to false alarms. So make sure your systems are working. Thank you for coming along today, and we'll see you at our next webinar next month. Thank you all.